The morning was calm, the kind of peaceful day suburban families dream of. Birds chirped, sunlight streamed through tall oak trees, and kids rode their bikes up and down the quiet cul-de-sac. Mark Thompson sat on his porch, coffee in hand, watching. His daughter Emma's SUV turned into the neighborhood. She had been away for months on a work assignment, as she called it, and now she was finally home. But that peaceful moment shattered when a loud voice echoed from down the street. "Hey, stop right there!" Mark squinted, confused, and then froze. At the far end of the road, the HOA's self-proclaimed head of security, Gary, had stepped out of his golf cart, waving his hands wildly, and then, unbelievably, reaching for the gun holstered on his hip. Emma hadn't even made it to their driveway before the scene escalated. Neighbors peeked through their windows as Gary shouted accusations about trespassing and unauthorized vehicles. Mark's heart pounded as he dropped his coffee and sprinted toward them, shouting for Gary to stop. What Gary didn't know, what nobody in the neighborhood knew, was that Emma wasn't just Mark's daughter. She was one of the youngest tactical commanders in the FBI, a woman trained to handle hostage crises, armed threats, and high-pressure negotiations. And in that moment, the calm, cheerful daughter the neighborhood thought they knew was gone. What stepped out of that SUV was someone else entirely. Emma stepped out of her SUV with a calmness that didn't match the tension rising in the air. Her dark aviator sunglasses reflected the trembling hands of Gary as he pointed the gun, shouting nonsense about violations and suspicious activity. Mark skidded to a stop beside her, his face pale. "Emma, please let me handle this," he whispered, terrified of what might happen, but Emma simply placed a steady hand on his arm. "Dad," she said softly, her voice steady but sharp. "Go back to the porch." Gary took a step closer, barking orders like a man who thought his HOA badge made him king of the street. But Emma didn't flinch. She spoke, her tone sharp and commanding, the same voice that had calmed hostages and coordinated dangerous raids. "Sir, lower the weapon." "Now," she said. The crowd of neighbors gathering nearby fell silent. There was something in her voice, controlled, precise, and undeniably authoritative, that made even the nosy neighbors pause mid-whisper. Gary blinked, his hand trembling on the trigger. He had no idea that in front of him stood someone trained to disarm people like him in less than 3 seconds, someone who'd spent years leading tactical teams into situations far deadlier than this. And as the silence grew heavier, Mark finally realized something. This wasn't just about Gary anymore. This was about a secret Emma had kept hidden from even her closest neighbors. And now, under the hot suburban sun, that secret was seconds from being revealed. Emma slowly removed her sunglasses, her sharp brown eyes locking onto Gary's. Her voice didn't waver, not even once. "You're going to lower that weapon," she said, each word sharp and calm. "You're going to take 3 steps back, and you're going to listen very carefully because you are seconds away from making the biggest mistake of your life." Gary's face twisted, somewhere between anger and confusion. "You don't get to order me around. I'm HOA security. This is private property," he barked, his voice cracking as his grip on the gun shook harder. Emma took one deliberate step closer. "Federal property," she corrected coldly, "because the second you aimed a firearm at a federal officer, this became a federal crime. And lucky for you, I'm feeling generous today." A ripple of gasps ran through the crowd. Neighbors exchanged shocked looks as Mark's knees nearly gave out. Federal officer? What was Emma talking about? Then she said the words that left everyone frozen in stunned silence. "My name is Special Agent Emma Thompson, FBI Tactical Commander," she said, flashing her credentials in one smooth motion. "And you just pointed a weapon at the wrong person." The color drained from Gary's face. His hand shook violently as he stammered, I didn't know. I was just—" Emma didn't give him the chance to finish. "Drop it," she commanded. And this time, he obeyed. The entire street had turned into a stage, with Emma standing at the center, calm, but unrelenting. Gary's gun lay on the pavement, his hands now raised high as if trying to erase what had just happened. Mark could hear the neighbors whispering, their voices carrying disbelief and awe. "She's FBI? Emma? The quiet girl who brings cookies to the HOA meetings?" Emma ignored the murmurs, her eyes never leaving Gary. "Do you understand what you just did?" she asked, her voice controlled but edged with steel. "You aimed a loaded weapon at a civilian without cause. That alone is a felony. But you aimed it at a federal agent. That is a whole different level of trouble." Gary's bravado crumbled, like dry sand. "I didn't know," he stammered again, voice shaking. I thought she didn't belong here." Mark's heart twisted in his chest. How could anyone look at his daughter, the girl who grew up riding her bike down this very street, and think she didn't belong? Emma stepped closer, her presence towering even without raising her voice. "This isn't about not knowing," she said sharply. "This is about thinking a badge you made in your garage gives you the right to terrorize people." The silence was deafening. Every neighbor, every bystander, every person who had ever turned a blind eye to Gary's power-hungry antics. They were all witnessing the moment his control shattered, and Mark, still standing frozen on the sidewalk, realized something. Emma hadn't just come home. She'd come home to end this. Police sirens wailed in the distance, and for the first time in years, Gary wasn't the one in control. Officers stepped out of their cruisers, quickly taking in the scene. A subdued man, a weapon on the ground, and a calm woman standing tall, with an FBI badge in hand. The officers spoke with Emma quietly, their tone shifting to one of respect as she explained the situation with precision. Mark watched from the porch, his hands trembling as relief washed over him. His daughter wasn't just safe. She was extraordinary. Neighbors began to drift back to their homes, whispering to each other about the revelation they had just witnessed. The quiet Thompson girl was an FBI commander. The same girl they'd underestimated, the same woman they'd ignored during HOA meetings, had just dismantled the neighborhood tyrant without lifting a finger. Emma finally walked back toward the porch, her expression softening as she approached her father. Mark tried to speak, but his throat tightened. She simply placed a hand on his shoulder and smiled. "It's over, Dad," she said gently. "You don't have to deal with him anymore." For the first time in years, Mark felt like he could breathe, and for the first time ever, he saw his daughter not just as his little girl, but as someone powerful, someone who had carved her own path and come home stronger than ever. The following week, the neighborhood was different. The whispers had quieted, and the fear that Gary had instilled for years was gone. His position as head of security had been stripped, and a formal HOA meeting was called to address the chaos he had caused. Emma didn't attend the meeting, but her presence was everywhere. The neighbors, once divided and intimidated, now found the courage to speak up, to demand better leadership and safer practices. Mark sat in the back of the meeting hall, quietly watching as one by one, the people who had been silent for so long finally found their voices. It was as if Emma's strength had unlocked something in them, a reminder that fear only works if you allow it to. When the meeting ended, one neighbor approached Mark with a soft smile. "Your daughter," she said quietly. "She changed everything for us." Mark simply nodded, his chest swelling with pride. Because deep down, he knew Emma hadn't just stood up to Gary. She had shown the entire neighborhood what it looked like to stand tall, to stay calm, and to demand respect without ever losing her humanity. Weeks passed, and the neighborhood began to feel like home again. Kids played outside without fear. Families waved to each other more. And Mark, every morning, found himself sitting on the porch, sipping his coffee and waiting for Emma's SUV to pull into the driveway. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emma joined him on the porch. They sat in silence for a moment, the warm summer air wrapping around them like a familiar blanket. "You know," Mark said finally, his voice quiet but steady, "I always knew you were strong, but that day you showed me just how strong you really are." Emma smiled, her gaze fixed on the fading light. "I didn't want you to worry, Dad," she said softly. "But I also didn't want anyone to think they could hurt the people I love." And in that moment, Mark realized something profound. His daughter wasn't just protecting the world out there. She was protecting the world they had built together, their family, their home, their peace. As the porch light flickered on and the crickets began their evening chorus, Mark felt a quiet sense of gratitude. Because no matter how dangerous, her world was, Emma had come home, and this time, he knew, nothing and no one would ever take that sense of safety away again.